Welcome, viewers, to this fourth episode of Equalizer. My guest today is Navy veteran and Korea federal agent Robert Ledogar of the U.S. Marshals Service. In this episode, we meet a dedicated public servant whose decades of service with both the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Marshals Service were marked by steadfast integrity. After defending a colleague from harassment, Robert remained true to his principles, even as he found himself under investigation and ultimately forced out by the very system he devoted his life to. His story is powerful and a powerful reminder that powerful institutions, the courage to act with integrity carries real risk. Sometimes standing up means standing alone. I invite you to listen to the interview. Thank you. Welcome, Robert, to this fourth edition of Equalizer. How have you been?
I'm good. I'm doing really good. Thank you.
All right. For our listeners, how did you start your career at the United States Marshals Service from the beginning? Give us a little bit of a background about you.
Okay. I started in June of 1995. I went to the Basic Academy in Glencoe, Georgia, and that was about 4 or 5 months to learn I became a criminal investigator and a deputy U.S. Marshal at the same time. And then I left Glencoe, Georgia, and started my career in Eastern District of New York in Brooklyn. And I did my whole career there, working in court operations, which was go before the federal judge in the federal courthouse with a prisoner, arrestee. I also did prisoner transportation. I did cell block duties and prisoner processing. I also worked warrants, fugitive investigations. I did judicial security for protection of federal judges and U.S. attorneys. I worked at the criminal section, which is more administrative duties to make the job run well. And then I was promoted in the midst of my career to become a supervisor, and I did duties within the cell block and operations for a couple of months, and then I went back into the warrant squad, and I was the supervisor of the men and women that I used to work alongside with. And I did that
many years. Before that, you were a veteran like myself. I was in the Army, you were in the Navy. At what age did you join the Navy?
I was in the Navy for almost 7 years. I went in as a seaman, boatswain's mate, and then I went on to become a master at arms, which is military police in the Navy.
And what year was this? And how old were you?
Oh, I was 17 when I went into the Navy. It was in 1988, and I got out in 1995. I got out of the Navy on a Saturday, and then on a Sunday, I was in the U.S. Marshals. I just went right into it.
That's great. Which cases or situations had a profound impact on you during your 30-year career, both in the military and in the U.S. Marshals Service?
Oh my goodness. I served in Pensacola, Florida in the Navy for a little over a year. Then I went on to Bahrain during Operation Desert Storm. And I was there for about 14 months. It was amazing. It was just so exciting to be there. I learned so much from so many of the men and women over there about doing security and law enforcement. Then from there, I went to La Maddalena, Italy, a small little island off the mainland. And I was a criminal investigator there working command investigations with NIS. That was a great duty station. I worked some drug cases, some theft cases, assaults, sex crimes. And then from there, I went to Little Creek, Virginia, and I was an instructor for shipboard security engagement tactics and weapons, and training ship security forces on how to perform in case a ship was ever overtaken by terrorists. Then from there, I went into the Marshals Service, and I had an amazing career.
What lessons did you learn about leadership and ethics in high pressure and high risk environments?
You know, I learned it more in the Navy at such a young age. I was a teenager, and I was in Desert Storm, and I learned from my chief, my senior chief, a gunny sergeant, a staff sergeant, and how to prepare yourself and be disciplined and take on reality when it comes at you. I mean, it was Desert Storm. The war was happening. And then I just carried that over to when I went into the Marshals Service, and I had so much experience of doing the job as military police. So I rolled right into U.S. Marshals. I knew how to take assignments, carry out the assignment, multitask, and work.
Be on time.
Yeah.
Discipline, be respectful.
And you learn that at a young age when I went into the military, and I learned it so well, and I carried it on to the rest of my career. And throughout my career, I had a great reputation of doing my job, being responsible, being relied upon, and making sure everybody was safe.
How would you describe the culture in the U.S. Marshals Service and law enforcement in general? The U.S. Marshals Service, for the viewers, is the oldest law enforcement agency in the United States. It has a big tradition. Many great people have gone through the ranks of the U.S. Marshals Service, and they an outstanding organization. But there is a hidden secret within the Marshals Service over the years. What is the culture like? And how did it affect you personally?
Well, in the beginning, you know, in the beginning, it's a tough job. You have to learn. You can't learn how to be a U.S. Marshal just by going to school. It's a hands-on job. It's like with being in the police department. You have to be out there. You have to be out in the field, we call it. You know, you have to be in the street working. So I learned it from some senior guys, and it's a in-your-face type of work. You know, we're dealing with bad people all the time. It's people getting arrested and going to jail for, you know, white-collar crimes, blue-collar crimes. I mean, it's dangerous stuff. You know, and it involves a lot of money, it involves weapons, and it can involve death.
Right.
So
you have to be able to trust the men and women you work with.
Yes, very much so. And when I worked in Brooklyn, I did. It was great. But then at times change, you know, and this whole new culture where it went to the woke style, you know, when we went more into people's feelings, and we lost, you know, tradition about, you know, people having to be healthy and physically fit and educated and have some knowledge to what's going on and understanding experience and taking that to the next level. But when you deal with different personalities, and when you bring feelings into it, it starts to change a lot, and things get distorted instead of the reality of, like, we work in a dangerous job. You have to trust each other and you have to rely on each other, because you don't know who's coming up behind you when you're walking through the door. So you have to hope your partner is back there to get you. And
Right.
it's changed.
But what happens is in law enforcement today, especially at the management level, you have a lot of empty suits. People that get promoted not on merit, not on knowledge, but because they are good taste takers, or maybe because they are well liked within the nepotism of the organization. How and when did you first learn about the harassment faced by a female deputy marshal who was targeted by members of the task force?
That young lady came to me several months after she went through everything, because she was trying to clean it up herself and fight through it, because she was an Army veteran and she knew she would get picked on, because in the Marshals Service it was the good old boy program.
Right. Dawn Mahoney is her name, and she was an excellent soldier, a soldier that met all the requirements and got an honorable discharge and applied and went through all of the training and end up earning the Marshal's badge, which she should have been part of that brotherhood, of that law enforcement brotherhood. Why did you decide to support the deputy marshal who was assaulted despite the personal and professional risk to your career?
I believed her. I believed when she told me what happened to her, because I worked with all the people that did this to her, and I knew how they were.
So you already knew their approach and their conduct and all of the stuff and games that they play and harassment that they could put a person through if they don't like the person within the unit.
Yes, I did. I seen them act in ways that when she told me what had physically happened to her, I could envision that by those guys doing that to her because of how they acted every day.
Right. What obstacles did you face when trying to get the case investigated internally, initially, when you first went to your bosses or when you wrote a memo? I don't know how the first report went through, but what happened then at that time?
In the very, very beginning, it was handled pretty well by our bosses within the district, and they were going to separate everybody, and it was reported to agency leadership and internal affairs. And when that happened, agency leadership at the assistant director and director level, they intervened and they pulled the internal investigation away from internal affairs and decided to have the division investigate themselves. And they didn't take it as a complaint of sexual harassment. Instead, they labeled it as office culture.
Right. And the reason that they do this, and it happens in police departments all over the world, including the United States, including the NYPD, is that they're there to protect the image of the department or of the agency. They're not there to find a solution to a problem. It is easier to bury it under the rug and get rid of the person that is making the report. And that's exactly what happened to you. Do you believe the institutional response was appropriate for the seriousness of the harassment and the assault?
Do I believe what I did?
No, do you believe the institutional response was appropriate for the seriousness of the harassment and assault on this deputy marshal?
No, I do not. And so many others do not also. And they still voice their opinion about it. And I agree with you. It's the leadership that is the problem, that they rise through these ranks because they bury their nose in reading the books and the policies and procedures, but they don't physically do the job. And then they get these titles and it becomes their ego. They need their title and their position to carry on each day and not do the job.
What protections did the victim request, and what specific actions were taken to safeguard her from the harassment escalation? What did the U.S. Marshal Headquarters or Assistant Director, whoever was in charge of handling this case, what steps did they take to protect her and her well-being?
They did none. The leadership did nothing to protect her. It was our chief and marshal in the district to help her. And we had to reassign her. So she was ultimately punished and
taken. She became the scapegoat, like
yes.
They always do with complainers, whistleblowers, or anybody that goes against the grain of these institutions.
And the same thing had happened to me as well. And what I did for her is I was worried about her own safety, her physical safety, knowing these men would harass her more. And they did. It did play out that way. And I wanted to bring her to Brooklyn, but she was working out in Long Island. And her billet was for Long Island. So I would have been transferring her from where she was assigned because of what happened. And we said, no, we kept her there, but she was stuck then in the workplace where some of these people were. So
how would you describe the work environment after the case became known to everyone and the internal investigation started? What happened with the retaliation? How did it start escalating for you and for the victim of this harassment?
It was absolutely terrible. I was instructed not to go to the Long Island office anymore. I had to stay in Brooklyn. I went through the investigation and was labeled a problem, that I was a bad supervisor, and that Dawn was taking things out of context of what was happening, that she wasn't mature enough or smart enough to handle the job. They lied. They created different stories about us and labeled us as bad. And it just escalated so bad for me and for Dawn that we had to break away. They were going to my house and parking unmarked cars in front of my house to intimidate my family.
Right, that's a typical tactic because it happened to me in the police department. They used to leave dead rats, cut their throat. The big white rats, they used to buy them in the pet shops and leave them on top of my hood, dripping blood with what was known as a Colombian necktie, where they pulled the tongue through the throat of the rat. And once you get labeled a rat within the job, nobody wants to work with you. You become almost a pariah. And they start putting labels. Oh, he's crazy, he's disgruntled, he's this, he's that. But in the reality it is the culture, this blue wall of silence, this unwritten code that protects the wrongdoers and is based on the nepotism within the organizations, based on the phone call tactics, where they could make a phone call and it will spread throughout the entire agency, and you won't be able to move to get promoted. They will harass your family. They will show up. They will put you under surveillance 24 hours a day. So you are like public enemy number one. But instead of fixing the problem by disciplining these characters that shouldn't even be calling themselves marshals, they are criminals with a badge or bigots with badges. There have been several cases in the U.S. Marshals Service, including with some blacks, some Latinos, and some whites that stood up for some of the black colleagues over the years that were labeled bigots with badges. It came out in the newspapers and all of that. And there's class actions that were paid, but none of the culprits ever got disciplined. It's like in the police department, they will rather pay to keep people from continue talking, but they will never admit guilt, and the culprits continue to get promoted, continue to advance, and their careers are not touched.
Well, you know what? When you bring that up about the bigots with badges, that happened in southern New York, in Manhattan. Now, fast forward to the incident with Dawn. Two of the people involved in the incident against Dawn were part of that incident, bigots with badges, in New York, in southern New York, Manhattan. They were now working in Long Island. They were part of that. But for me, when you said how they label the blue wall, how they label you a rat, and they harass you and put it out there to all your coworkers. For me, what they did to me was they came out with a story and said that I was a racist, that I walked around the office and used the N-word all day long against everybody, and everybody knew it, but nobody said anything. For years, my whole career, they said this. It got so bad that Internal Affairs came after me and said I was a racist because of what two task force officers said. And
right. But those two task officers were also involved in this incident. Meaning, yes, the same people that harassed the deputy marshal, and you are a supervisor, they came after you and they believed them more than they did you. I know that they investigated you 4 times. The first 3 cases got unsubstantiated, meaning they didn't find anything wrong, they couldn't prove anything. And then the last case is when 2 months before you were supposed to retire, after all of good years of service, they called you up and dismiss you from the Marshals Service, losing your pension, losing your medical benefits, losing everything that you worked your entire life for.
Yes, and what made it so much more disgusting is that they did it during the heightened level of COVID, when everything was shut down and everybody was home working from home. And the people gathered everything and cherry-picked and manipulated the past reports to blend it into the new report to terminate me, saying that I violated the Code of Professional Responsibility by digging into things that I was involved with that had nothing to do with the complaints that were made against me. They just dug more and more and more to find stuff against me. And when I was being interviewed, the officials to make the decision against me, said that I lacked candor and was lying during my interviews. But in my interview, at the closing of my interview for what they said I lied, I was being interviewed by the chief investigator from Internal Affairs, the chief. That's how high my case was. And he said at the very end in closing, "Thank you for your candor and bringing all this to our attention." He says on the record, I don't lie.
No, but I'm going to explain something to you as a former investigator in internal affairs, both in the U.S. Customs Service as an undercover, in the Corrections Department of the City of New York, and later on in the NYPD. Internal affairs is there to protect the image of the institution. Internal affairs is not there to weed out corruption. And that's why every 20 years, the New York City Police Department has a corruption scandal. It happened during the Gross Commission, then the Knapp Commission, then later the Mullen Commission, and now you see what is going on inside the police department, where there is major lawsuits, including a former commissioner of the New York City Police Department suing the police department and the culture within the department for high-level corruption.
And when that, William, that when you say it, the way you say it is that they're not there for you, that crushes you. It broke my heart that they, internal affairs and the leadership, would much rather investigate a false accusation against an employee, a decorated employee, and not try to clear the employee, but go off of a false lie against an employee to keep the agency looking good.
Right. How did you feel when you realized the same agents you had reported were now making the false accusations against you and against the complainant, which is also a deputy U.S. Marshal?
In the beginning, I found it very funny that they would do that, knowing that it was so false and so distorted that internal affairs would see it right away. But when I went through it and saw what internal affairs was doing to me and ignoring my responses and my actions, they said that I was stealing drugs from the evidence locker and I was the evidence custodian, that I was selling drugs and taking drugs, but they never inspected anything. They didn't give me a drug test, nothing. And I went and got drug test. I'm clean, but they let me still work there, but you didn't clear me. And then show that those people were lying. They made up lies about me and they did nothing.
And you know what was so terrible about this? That in a couple of years, those guys, if they still remain on the job, they will become bosses and they will become the corrupt leadership of those agencies.
Well, one of the investigators that had my case from internal affairs, he's still on the job. And what he had done was he held my case and went to a temporary duty assignment for 6 months to do an acting spot to get promoted, and then came back. But for 6 months, you kept me in limbo when there's policy that you have to clean up a case in 90 or 180 days. But you kept me, I was being punished. I couldn't get promoted. I couldn't advance. I couldn't do anything. I was stuck in their investigation.
Do you perceive a bias within internal affairs during your interrogations? You know when you feel like you go into a room and no matter what you say, their mind is already made up?
Yes, I was set upon. It was easier to go after me instead of investigating the truth of what Dawn had reported, because that being proven true would put such a stain on the higher leadership of the marshals, because it's coming from the task force that encompasses so many people and so many agencies, that it would be embarrassing that this had happened, that there's a sexual harassment case against each other. So
were there a repetitive pattern in the accusations you face, and what similarities do you notice with other cases that you were there to witness during your time in the Marshals Service?
Oh, well, the Marshals Service relies on these things called comparables, and they try to match up past incidents of people that commit new incidents to give out an equal punishment. But for me, they didn't. They went full core against me to hurt me. It's just like what you said. You see the corruption after so many years. It goes flat for a few years and then it starts again. And you see that.
See, what is funny about what the accusation they made against you, the lies they made against you regarding the evidence of drugs, and there's a chain of custody with all of that. And all of that gets put into different paperwork, it gets put into systems. And it's not like you just could take a bag and disappear it. Well, it happened during the French Connection inside the evidence in the NYPD. But you know how they found out? The roaches were eating sugar because they changed some of the heroin for sugar. The heroin disappeared.
Right.
But that was during that time. Did you receive any institutional support during the investigation, or did you feel isolated? It plays on your psychic. You could be the strongest man alive, but when you see that they are labeling you, lying against you, you feel like you're fighting inside a paper bag and you feel out of air. Because it used to happen to me. No matter what you did, no matter how you reported it, they will rather, for example, in some of my cases, they suspended the cops that gave me the information against a chief. They rather suspend the cops that give you the information, and then when I came up with the tapes, then they say, now we're not suspending you for that, we're suspending you because you are impeding an investigation by not turning over the tapes.
Yeah.
So when you see that, you kind of saying, you damn if you do, and you damn if you don't.
Right. And I had the support of my district leadership. I even had the support of leadership from the task force where these men worked. I had support from so many agencies, U.S. attorneys, judges, everybody. But to go outside, I couldn't go. My own agency, they weren't. The headquarters wasn't there to protect me. I couldn't go to the ombudsman to talk. I couldn't go to EAP because they would find out, and then they would deem me of having a problem and would take away my gun. And when they were moving forward to come after me hard, then they were proposing to fire me, and they took away my gun, my car, my badge, my credentials, access, but they still made me go to work. But now I had to take public transportation or drive my own car. I'm still a supervisor with no protection.
Well, that's part of the embarrassment. That's part of trying to break you as a human being. And I tell the viewers this. A lot of cops eat their own gun, and a lot of cops commit suicide because they have no place to turn. If you go against that blue wall of silence on your own, you're going to run into a lot of problems if you don't have the discipline. In your case, in my case, we were both veterans. We both saw the world before we even became, police officer or agents. But the culture needs to change. How did the investigation and media attention affect your family and personal life?
It bothered and scared my wife, and she's still afraid today, but she's so much better. She was worried about her job, about getting fired from her own job because of what was going on with me. But that never happened. She had all the support in the world from her job, as well as they supported me because they know us. My family, my mom and dad, my mom, it crushed her. My dad's my biggest fan, my supporter right next to me. And we tried to keep it as quiet as we can from my sister and my nieces and nephews, because they're in school. They're children, they're kids. To hear all this and see it on the internet of these things about me, it's crushing. And you're so right about suicide, because it happens. And I really, really believe that the agency when they're going after you, they know they can crush you. Financially, they crush you because you have to pay for lawyers, and you can't get promoted, and you're getting suspended from work before they fire you. And then you get fired, and they want you to go away, ultimately go away. They want you to kill yourself.
Right. Did you receive any external support, for example, from unions, civil rights organizations, or the media at the beginning of the case?
No, we kept it kind of quiet until when I got terminated and fired. Then I went out there, and it was because of you and Frank Gonzalez that got me the help from the National Police Defense Foundation and Joe Occhipinti. And I worked with your friend Frank Gonzalez.
Yeah, Frank was a senior postal inspector supervisor in New York, and later on in his career, he became a criminal defense investigation, one of the best in the nation. And it's a group of us old-timers, I call ourselves. They're a little bit older than us, but when you're up in your 60s already, things are not the same. But the National Police Defense Foundation, founded by Joseph Occhipinti, a former Immigration Service special agent in charge of a unit in New York at 26 Federal Plaza, he himself became a target of his own organization by lies made up by the Dominican organization called La Compañía, where they utilize his business card that somebody made a bunch of them, and said that he was shaking down bodegas when everything was a lie. He went to jail, and finally, he got a presidential pardon, which he deserves. Joe, over the years, I have done a lot of investigations for them over the years, all over the United States. And internal investigations is almost a specialty. You have to know what you're looking for, because underneath this veil of correctness and of law, there's a web of lies and a web of deceit and a web of lacking you to get the information you need to defend yourself. Now let's get into the Merit Protection Board. How did the MSPB issue with quorum and delays affect your case?
It affects me big time right now because my case is in appeal. So the quorum is a 3-panel judges. And right now, there's only one judge sitting on it to read over all these cases. So there's hundreds to maybe thousands of cases ahead of mine sitting there. So,
right. And in the meantime, you're in limbo
yes,
about your pension, and you don't know which way your future is going to go.
right.
What do you believe the agency should do better to prevent this kind of retaliation that's institutionalized in the culture and network of influence?
You know, I'm so stubborn to answer that because I'm just so focused on my case. Like the answers are there that I was targeted, I was betrayed and retaliated against. It's all there, especially for me because I have every chief that I ever worked for go to agency leadership and tell them they got it wrong, that I'm not the bad guy. But they still stuck it out and came after me. So I really believe that the internal affairs investigators are just not smart. They're not smart enough or they have no integrity to bring out the real truth instead of just towing the line for the agency. Where's your honor and code and integrity to tell the truth? It's not there.
Right. Was there a good old boys club or good old boys network within the Marshals Service or the task force? And how did they operate?
Yes, there is. And I was even a victim of it for when I was in Brooklyn and then going out to Long Island, where I would work with the guys in Long Island and we would only work an hour in the morning and then they would disappear and they wouldn't communicate with me and they wouldn't extend invitations to me, like to go out after work to the bar. They wouldn't invite me. Instead, they wanted to try to get to know me instead of right away. Like the camaraderie was not there. It was very tight knit. They protected themselves instead of working with the whole agency.
Can you give examples of how phone calls are made to try to derail you from succeeding in your own defense?
I know they were. I know because I know the one chief who was in the task force was friends with the people at headquarters. And he, of course, instead of telling the truth, went and just protected his people from the task force to hurt me.
Right. And the important part of this, Rob, is that it happens in almost every case.
It does.
The
It does.
phones are made to influence the outcome and to gather support within the people that make the ultimate decisions. We say that a lot of people have their noses so far up high management that if any of them made a pivot to the right or to the left, they will get their noses broken. And that's how they race through the ranks. And, it's the cousin, the nephew, the niece, this. It doesn't matter if you are a veteran. Veterans should be cherished. We put our life on the line at a very young age. And it doesn't matter if there was no war during the time you served. When you signed that contract, it didn't specify, well, you're not a veteran if you didn't go to war. It just happened that there was no war during that time.
Right.
But when you sign that contract, and even in the VA, they have that distinction when you're applying for stuff. Oh, but you weren't in the war, so you don't have PTSD, so that doesn't apply to you. But if you have the condition, why don't you take a second look at it? Because there were space healers that used kerosene, caused cancer. You had water in the bases that was no good. That are, soldiers are dying years after they serve, and the system is set up in a way to only help the few, but not look at the entire picture. I mean, let me ask you another question. Do you believe favoritism and cronyism are systematic in federal law enforcement agencies today?
Yes. And I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand, and I was the victim of it. And I really believe when you bring it up about being veterans, and I feel like I'm a veteran and Dawn is a veteran, and we were ignored or pushed to the side over the non-veterans.
Right. And those people that worked in McDonald's out in Long Island, they took a couple of courses in college, took the test for the marshals, and got in because their father made a phone call to the marshal that was elected, because they handpicked the people in charge. Whether it's the Eastern District or Southern District, those positions are handpicked. They are elected. So there are favors to pay. And,
Well, when you said there's more to that too, because the one marshal we had in Eastern New York, he was a state trooper, and he made it a point to promote a deputy over another guy who was more qualified. He promoted this one deputy because he was also an ex-state trooper. And
right.
that guy went on to headquarters and hurt me. And we worked together. He lied to protect other people that he wasn't even good with. He knew the people in Long Island were bad. He knew it. He worked with them. And now he was at headquarters and he could have told the truth, and he didn't.
Right. But to be fair to some of the supervisors you worked for, they all gave letters of commendation, which I have copies. I read them, beautiful letters. They speak very highly of you as a marshal, and later on as a supervisor. And not everyone is bad, but what happens is you could have 99% of the Marshals Service or the DEA or the NYPD be good, but that 1% is a cancer that touches all levels, because corruption doesn't start at the bottom. Corruption starts at the top and it trickles down. If you took money as a patrolman and then later on in your career you become the commissioner of the police department, all of those years that you took money, whether it was from the mob, whether it was from gambling locations, whether it was shaking drug dealers down, and you never got caught, that doesn't mean that you are a good person.
Right.
1% of corrupt individuals. And what happens a lot is that people rather look the other way, not to make waves. There was when I came out in Nightline years ago with David Marish and Ted Koppel, they questioned the police department, and what was said about me is, what happens is Mr. Acosta took his oath too literally. How am I supposed to take my oath if it's almost the same oath you take when you go in the military to protect the Constitution and the people of the state or the country that you're serving, right?
I agree with you totally, and I agree with taking the oath and fulfilling it. And I was even said to me about me by another supervisor, and he said that I was the type of guy that I care too much. I care too much, and you're supposed to. And I'm glad you read some of those letters, because the men and women who wrote letters for me, I got hundreds of them, hundreds. They had the courage and the bravery and the integrity and the honor to write about me. And they put it on pen and paper and they signed their name to it and they printed their name on it honorably because they believed in me so much. And those letters, they're like a badge for me. They saved my life. What these people did for me. And then some of those people were targeted by my own agency too and labeled.
How does this affect this merit system? How does this affect the opportunities in the meritocracy? I call it meritocracy. How does this affect the cases?
The government wins majority of the cases because the people that are fighting them give up. They financially cannot afford to fight anymore because they have to go get a job. They have to go work and they have to provide for their families. And the system, the MSPB and the agency's lawyers know that. And they just let it drag out. There's no time frame. It goes on for years. It destroys you.
What percentage of the cases in your experience are influenced by personal connections?
I don't know about the personal connections. I think it's more intimidation of titles and people that are in positions that can do things. So, okay, no, there is the personality because they know certain people and people are making phone calls.
Right,
the people
because
that they like. So,
the people that are making these accusations against you are regular deputy U.S. Marshals. Maybe they have a rank within that before becoming supervisors, but they have to have all them favors to side with them, or there has to be a family, or they come from the same neighborhood, or they know the father because the father was a marshal with them, or the father got killed in the job, or whatever the hell. And you see it on promotions also. You see guys join the police department and within 2 years they're detectives. I don't know how they do that, but they do it.
Right.
You see people that never worked in the street and all of a sudden they become detectives and they go to the detective bureau. When you have guys in the squads, third graders for 27 years, they never get promoted and they're hard workers and they work day in, day and night. And you see people in internal affairs raise through the ranks all the way up to first grade detective, and they never leave internal affairs. Meaning, most of them came in under what is called the field associate program. It's where you get recruited out of the academy, you go in uniform, and all you are is an informant with a police badge, and then when they want to pull you out after you did a lot of cases for them, they reward you and they make you a third grade detective. Or a lot of them don't even go through the academy until they work a couple of years, and all of a sudden you see a detective guy at the ceremony. You say, why is he a detective? Well, he was undercover, he was a field associate, or he got recruited when he was signing the papers to go onto the job. A lot of people don't know this. What could be done to reduce the influence of these networks and encourage greater transparency for people to come forward without feeling retaliated against?
Well, first they have to abide by the policies that are in place. They manipulate their own policies to people leadership. They use it against the people that come forward to hurt them. They twist and turn it. Then you can't have people in the same positions for so many years. You have to rotate and move around. You can't stay in that same job for 10, 15, 20 years.
Right. What could be done to reduce the influence? Meaning, if they bring you up on charges, right? And you request discovery material on your case, phone calls are made not to reproduce the documents, the tapes, or whatever you need to defend yourself. What can be done for them to accelerate that process and for them to really comply with the discovery procedure in this type of cases?
Well, in the government, it gets pushed around so easily because they ignore Congress or the Senate with responding, or they come up with these silly excuses of operational commitments to a judge's order, and nothing's set in stone. It's like make believe. They do what they want, and to fight it, William, I really don't know. I don't know why it can't be run the way it's supposed to be ran.
Right.
I don't understand is how you can see, and I don't understand is how many of these court cases with President Trump are automatically going right to Supreme Court right so quickly, but a guy like me is waiting years to get to court.
I mean, I know the case of Steve Sanwick, a U.S. Deputy Marshal, also a Vietnam-era veteran. And they depleted him, and they threw him out. He had a family. He's now living in Florida. They destroyed him because he was the only white person that stood up for the black U.S. Marshals in the Southern District. They made his life miserable.
Yeah.
They suspended him several times. They send him here, there. They put him in the worst assignments. Nobody wanted to work with him. They made a pariah out of him. And like him, I know people in other agencies that call me for help, or call me because they need someone that has been through this to walk through the system. And it's important that the people with the experience utilize this experience to help others. It doesn't do any good for me to keep my story, or you keep your story silent, when there are people suffering in those units.
Right.
I mean, in a daily basis. Let's speak a little bit about the merit system and looking ahead. What is your opinion of the current state of the federal civil service merit system? Besides the backlog and them taking their sweet time because they have so many cases, do they need to revamp the system? Do they need to assign more people to make the decisions instead of just the 3 elected officials by the president to review these thousands of cases?
Well, if they're going to keep it in place, it needs to get totally revamped and restructured, because it's just not working. They don't have enough employees to work there. They don't have enough staff. They don't have enough trained staff. They're not in the right positions. You need legal-minded personnel there, law clerks. You need law clerks there. You need paralegals there, administrative assistants there. They don't have that. They have interns working there, reviewing cases and writing up findings that a judge just signs off on, and it's so wrong. And then you fight that, and it's money. I have to spend money, and I only have certain time frames to do things. And they put these policies in place that don't help me. They don't help you as the complainant. They don't help at all. That they take things away from you that you don't have enough to tell your story and to put the evidence and the facts out there. It has to get totally changed around. It needs to be more like a court, and it's not. And it's the same thing with the MSPB. It's just like with the EEO complaints. That's a disaster too. And I went through that as well, and it's terrible.
Robert, we got to conclude this part, but we're going to invite you for this second part.
Okay.
Our conversation with Robert Ledogar, Navy veteran and U.S. Marshals Service supervisor, and most importantly, a man of unwavering integrity, finds a sharp contrast between the ideals of public service and the realities faced by those who challenge misconduct from within. Ledogar's defense of a female colleague exposed not only the persistent harassment of law enforcement officers, but also the personal and professional risks that come with standing up to the system and the blue wall of silence. His experience underscores the gap between official policies and an underground culture where the blue wall of silence and the bureaucratic relations often prevail over justice and accountability. For listeners considering a career in law enforcement or any position of public trust, this story is a stark reminder that institutions are only as just as the people willing to defend them and stand up for what is right, even at a great personal cost. True change requires not just rules or paper, but the courage to act and sometimes to stand alone. Thank you, Robert, for sharing your story with Equalizer, and thank you, the audience, and my great producer, helping me put this show together. If you found this episode valuable, share it with others who care about justice, integrity, and real challenges of holding powerful system accountable. Until the next time, keep questioning, keep listening, and never underestimate the impact of standing up, no matter the cause. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, William. Thank you very much.
Dear friends, we hope you enjoyed this interview and invite you to follow us on the social media platforms shown on the screen. See you next time. Thank you for being with us.